that brought Ronald Reagan to the presidency, Barry Goldwater. Tom?
Senator Goldwater, for 18 years you served with Bob Dole in the Senate, 18 years, and yet you've endorsed another man, George Bush.
That's right.
Did you find out something during those 18 years about Bob Dole that you didn't like?
I don't like to say I didn't like. I like Bob Dole. But in 18 years, he really didn't show leadership ability. When we had Republican domination of the Senate, he couldn't get them all to vote Republican.
Al Haig said that Bob Dole was head and shoulders above George Bush just on leadership.
Well, Al Haig's a hell of a good Army general.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, let me go. Bert Lance, you want to get into this. Is there any chance your friend Jesse Jackson hopefully can be on the Democratic ticket?
Well, we're going to wait and see about that. We have to let the process run its course, Pat. As you well know, the voters are going to be deciding over the course of the next
He's going to do very well tomorrow. He's going to get a lot of delegates, and he's going to go to the convention. What does he want? Does he want to be on the ticket? What does he want out of the platform?
Well, again, I think what you have to think about is this, that I am convinced beyond any doubt whatsoever that Jesse Jackson has matured into a fine political leader. He's run a good campaign. And I think he wants to see a Democrat elected in November, and I think that's what effort is going to be made by him. He would prefer to be that candidate in November.
Right,
I don't think he's any... Well, that may be subject to the voters.
It's a practical matter, Bert Lance. I know he's matured and all that, but you put him on the Democratic ticket, and you'll take that ticket down to defeat worse than George McGovern and Walter Mondale. Wouldn't you agree with that?
No, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that what we've got to do, we've got to let this process work. And any Democrat who goes through the primary and caucus effort and gets enough votes to be on the ticket, then he's not going to cause great harm to the ticket.
But Lance, look, let me get one more question in here. They're calling Super Tuesday Stupid Tuesday. And the reason they are is because the South wanted to get its voice in there, to get a conservative voice in the Democratic side, because twice you nominated Northern liberals, McGovern and Mondale, twice you lost 49 states, twice you lost every Southern state. Coming out of Super Tuesday, you're going to have Michael Dukakis, the most liberal guy in the race, with the exception of Jesse Jackson, as your two prominent candidates. Wasn't Super Tuesday a mistake? Didn't it backfire?
No, Pat, I don't think so. Let me give you my view, and a lot of folks in the Democratic Party, certainly as well as the Republican Party, don't agree with me about that, but I think that Super Tuesday has served the purpose to a large degree in diminishing the influence of Iowa and New Hampshire. I think that's awfully important in the process. We now have still 6 candidates on the Democratic side. You can divide them into whatever tiers you want to. You still have 4 candidates on the Republican side. So those candidates have been able to take their message to the South. The South is going to respond tomorrow by voting for the candidate of their choice, and then we're going to move on. So
Senator
I think
Goldwater, let me ask you the same question. Do you think the American people, it's not your party, but do you think the American people are ready for a black as president or vice president?
I think they are. I talked to Jesse once about this. He asked me, I told him, in answer to his question, we'd have a woman president, and someday we'd have a black president. I didn't think he would be the one. I feel that it might be a little bit early, but on the other hand, he's very well accepted. And I'll have to say this, that of all the Democratic candidates, he has more intelligence than any of them.
You shot Pat Buchanan beyond words, Senator Goldwater.
No, Senator, let me get back to the Republicans here for a second. You obviously think George Bush is going to be next president of the United States. So do I. Who would you like to see him pick as his vice presidential running mate?
I have no idea. I really don't.
Not at all?
What about Elizabeth Dole?
That's good enough.
Well, all right. Think on that. I don't know. I think the governor of California...
Duke Majin?
I never can pronounce his name. That's my problem. Or the governor of New Jersey.
Kane? Tom Kane, right.
Jack Kemp, maybe.
Tell me about Jack Kemp. Now, you are the father of the conservative movement in 1964. You got a lot of us in there, and we all marched up that hill, and I don't know what happened. But then Ronald Reagan came along, and he became your successor as the leader of the movement. Now, this year, people said Jack Kemp is going to emerge now that Ronald Reagan's retired as the leader of the conservative movement, leader of the future. What happened?
Jack Kemp, this is my own feeling. Right. When you get talking about an issue called economics, and that's all you talk about, the American people don't understand economics. Economics to them is how much money they got in their pocket.
Right. They don't care about theory.
And Jack goes on about this theory, that theory, and so forth and so on. I'll admit it's a very important issue, but the American people don't grab it like they've been grabbing other issues.
Bert Lance, let me ask you this. You answer the question for the senator. Who would be the toughest man for the Democrats to beat, Bob Dole or George Bush?
Well, obviously, I don't like to speculate about that because I remember in 1980 that some of the Carter folks seemed to think that it would be easier to run against Ronald Reagan. That didn't turn out to be a very good choice, so I'm not going to get caught up in that process. I learned my lesson in 1980 that you don't talk about that. I'd rather talk about the strengths of the Democratic candidates than talk about...
But Dole is saying that Democrats would vote for him, and he says there are polls which show that he would run stronger against the Democrats than Bush would.
They probably ought to switch parties, don't you think?
Senator, what do you think about the... now, again, let's talk about the conservative movement. It was something in 1964 when you led it. It's really broadened now. You've got libertarians in there. You've got a religious right in there. You got preachers in politics. You got moral majority. What do you think of Pat Robertson? Would you call him a conservative? Would you like to see him prosper in the GOP?
In South Carolina, I told Pat Robertson to get out of the race. I don't want a minister, although we've had a minister in the history of our presidents. I don't want a minister sitting in the White House. I never known him. Of course, I served with his father, who was a wonderful man. But Pat's made so many statements that are absolutely wrong and false. I'd hate to see him in the White House even if he weren't a minister.
Why? I mean...
Because I don't think he has much sense. When you talk about missiles in Cuba, and he probably read the latest book that Bill Buckley wrote, which talks about that. That's the theory of the book.
Buckley wrote a novel, though, didn't he?
It's a novel.
Yeah.
All Buckley's stuff is novels.
He's written some other good books that are novels, right?
Look, Senator, could you decide which Democrat would be the easiest for the Republicans to beat?
Well, I would think anybody but Dukakis. I'd say he's the top man.
He's the toughest?
Well, I would call him the toughest. He's done a wonderful job in Massachusetts.
Right.
His only problem is, in my book, he's just too liberal.
Right. Well, I agree. I mean, he's a northern liberal. He's got that reputation. He's further left. I think Gephardt, my own view is both Gephardt and Gore could get votes that we normally get in presidential elections in the South. I don't think Dukakis or Jackas...
Let me ask the Senator to define his terms a little bit. We don't want to get off on the dictionary, but in what way has Dukakis been left or liberal?
I heard the two, he and Gore talking the other day about the need for a program to help old men. And it was going to cost $9 billion. And they were talking like it was going to come out of their pocket. Well, that's what I call liberal. When you talk about spending money that we don't have, you're not going to find $9 billion.
Well, that makes President Reagan the biggest liberal in the universe, doesn't it? Senator Goldwater.
You might be partly right.
You know, I think that I am, because obviously that's been his forte, is spending money we didn't have.
Senator, you're Mr. Conservative, and you started the conservative movement, and the conservative movement has now become Pat Buchanan plus the right to lifers plus the religious fringe. I guess that's about all it consists of. Does it seem to you that it's gone off on the wrong track?
I think some of it has. I don't buy a lot of these right-wing, I call them nuts, that...
Do you hear that, Pat?
They call themselves...
He was looking over toward Bert when he said that.
I was looking at him. The people that espouse all these crazy causes under the name of conservatism, I don't buy that. Conservatism goes way, way back to Socrates. It's the oldest philosophy that I know of. But nobody likes to see it abused and misused. And I think it's getting that treatment.
Do you want to name names? Would you name names?
Oh, my God, how long's the program?
Well, we've got just 10 minutes, 10 seconds before the break. Throw a couple out.
No, you can't do it. I can't let them name names, Pat.
We've got our lawyers on. Our lawyers
We're going to take a break for a commercial, and when we get back, we'll try to find out from Bert Lance exactly what Jesse Jackson will settle for.
Welcome back to Crossfire, where we're talking about Super Tuesday tomorrow, and we're talking with Bart Lance, former budget director and confidant of President Jimmy Carter, and Mr. Conservative himself, Barry Goldwater. Senator Goldwater, just at the break, you were saying two of the key things on which the government of the United States should concern itself are taxes, keeping them low, I think, in government, and maintaining a strong national defense.
That's right.
What kind of marks do you give the Congress of the United States?
About -0. This is the worst Congress, I think. I thought my last Congress was the worst you could ever serve in, but this one takes the cake. I sit out home and watch this outfit on television, and I can't believe that these men were elected by Americans to come here and defend the Constitution and defend the country.
You remember men like Walter George, Richard Russell.
Yes.
Even when you had liberals, you had the fellow, who was the fellow from Illinois, Paul Douglas.
Paul Douglas.
You had very, very big men. Do you see any big, great men in the Congress today?
Oh, there's a few.
Sam Nunn from Georgia, Senator Goldwater, and I've already talked about that. He sees him as
Sam Nunn, Malcolm Wallops of Wyoming.
But by and large, it's a low-grade stock.
All they're interested in is getting reelected. When they hear a command from Israel, they jump. And as a result, we're losing friends.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Hold it a second, Tom. What do you mean when they hear a command from Israel, they jump?
Well, I think Israel probably has more effect on the Congress than any country in the world, and more effect probably than in some issues than America.
Well, Senator, that reminds me, that hasn't been mentioned in this campaign.
I know it.
We've all watched, you've watched, Mr. Lance has watched, Pat, me, everybody has watched the Israeli soldiers beating up on Palestinians for the last 3 weeks. Is the Israeli tail wagging the American dog?
Something's wagging the American dog. It might be the tail, it might be the leash.
Well,
I don't know, but they certainly run this place.
Mr. Lance?
Well, but both Jesse Jackson and Senator Hardy have talked about it in some length, and especially in the debate last Saturday, they talked about it.
They mentioned it. It's true, but the Republican candidates...
the Republicans haven't mentioned it at all.
No.
Listen, Senator Goldwater, we've watched for 3 months, not 3 weeks, this violence on the West Bank. Today, however, the Israeli, a couple of Palestinian terrorists shot up a bus and killed 3 Jewish women on the bus. What do you think, very briefly, United States policy should be toward Israel in the wake of what's going on?
I think we ought to get real tough with them, withdraw all support, till they finally sit down.
Withdraw the $3 billion in aid?
Yes, if necessary. You have to remember that the PLO, in all the history of this world, have never had a piece of land that they could call their own.
Palestinian people.
That's right. Now,
the Israelis say if you give them the land to call their own, the PLO will arrive, they'll put up the PLO flag, and they'll try to liberate all of Palestine, which means the end of the Jewish state if you do that.
I don't believe that for 1 minute. I think the Jewish armed forces probably are stronger than any combination of countries in that part of the world.
Do you share this view, Bert?
Well, I think Senator Goldwater just put his finger right on an important point, that there has to be something done there in mutual recognition for mutual security, land for peace, whatever the conversation is.
Why do you think the candidates aren't discussing it? You mentioned that Jesse Jackson has, but aside from him...
Well, and Senator Hardy has
well, all right,
about
but he's
it.
not a candidate.
He's gone.
Well, that's we've got to wait until that process works. But Jesse Jackson has talked about it. Well, the process is important. They have a right to have it work.
Okay.
So, but Jesse Jackson has talked about it, obviously, from a deep concern, because he says that Israel and the Palestinians are locked in a death grip, and we need to free them from that so that...
Do you think Jesse Jackson makes more sense on Israel and the Middle East than most of the other candidates?
Well, my judgment is that he makes sense. I'm not going to get into the business of criticizing any Democratic candidate right before Super Tuesday, but I don't think there's any question in my mind that he makes sense about the problem.
Let me ask you again about Jesse Jackson, Mr. Lance. What do you think, supposing he goes into the convention, which is not, which now they are predicting, with the 25% of the delegates, and maybe more?
Perhaps more.
He'll have a very strong situation on that floor. What do you think he'll settle for?
Well, again, I think that all of us have to understand that he wants to see a Democrat elected. And anything to talk about what he settles for at this point in time is not really important, because the people of the country have a right to vote first. And we need to see how many delegates he has and what he does about that. All right, then to say that he wants to be vice president, or he wants this, or he wants that, that's not what he's about. He really is about saying to the people of this country, here are the issues that I think are important. He wants respect for the kind of campaign that he's run. He wants respect for his mind.
But he's got to have evidence of that respect.
But we have to get
you got to get the job
or a position.
No, it doesn't mean a job or a position. It means an agenda.
Senator, you were really the original victim of an attack ad, the Daisy Girl commercial. I think even the other side now is pretty damned ashamed of the hydrogen bomb and the little girl 10987 when they run against you in 64. Now, the whole South, all it is one attack ad after another, responding back and forth to each other. What do you think of this? They're not as bad as the Daisy thing, but...
Well, they're not even good ads. I've seen some of them down there, and if I were a candidate and my team brought up some of those ads, I'd dismiss the team. Negative campaigning can be done in an intelligent way.
Right.
It doesn't have to be dirty. It doesn't have to be dishonest. But there's a lot of it that's both.
This is a real mistake in my judgment, by the way.
Why would it be a mistake if everybody's doing it? Obviously, they're doing it because it works.
Well, I don't know about that. I think you have to wait and see. Again, Jesse Jackson has remained above the fray. He said to the Democrats, look, you ought not to do this because it's going to make it harder for us all to get together going forward into the convention.
Bert Lance, I have to ask you again, because I don't think you answered the question. I probably didn't. What do you think Jackson will demand as a token of the Democratic Party's esteem?
Tom, I think what he can expect is to be able to be afforded the fact that he's run a good campaign, that he may or may not be the nominee depending on how the vote comes out, because if he gets 50% plus one, then he can be the nominee, that he is entitled to a place in saying this is what we're concerned about in the Democratic Party. The question of drugs, for example. No other candidate has talked about the drug problem as much as he has. He's a conservative in regard to the drug situation. Senator Goldwater would agree on that. Economic violence, that's a common ground. You know, I was thinking a minute ago, Pat, you will appreciate this, that the one thing that Reverend Jackson has done is found common ground with regard to economic circumstances, the drug problem, and even with Senator Goldwater and Tom Braden and Jesse Jackson, which is a great threesome, they found common ground about Governor Meekum.
Let me ask you something. Senator, what kind of president do you think Ronald Reagan has been now that he's been in there 7 years plus?
I think his first term, I would give him a 10. Second term so far, if you put it 1 to 10, maybe a 5.
How about you? Let me ask you, why has Ronald Reagan perceived to have succeeded with the American people for 8 years? He had a big blunder with Iran-Contra. Whereas Jimmy Carter, even in his third year, was down to 25% in the polls. What's the one thing Carter you think did wrong?
Well, I think that the fact that President Reagan has been able to communicate, people perceive his leadership qualities. They perceive that he really cares about them. And I think you have to give President Reagan good marks for that. He's made America...
His problem, couldn't communicate.
Well, his problem was that he had the last year of the hostage situation, which was really bad. He had the economic cycle going against him, where President Reagan was good enough, wise enough, or fortunate enough, or lucky enough, whatever you want to call it, to have the economic cycle going in the right direction. He had his problems in the first 2 years and then moved on. So I think there's a difference there.
Thank you for being our guest on Crossfire, Senator Goldwater. Thank you. Pat and I will be back in just a minute.
Well, Tom, we asked Lance 4 times, you and I, what exactly Jesse Jackson wants, and you know any more now than when the show started about what he wants? He maneuvered around that pretty well.
He did, but Pat, I think what he said was this, and I think he's right, that if Jesse Jackson gets the nomination or the vice presidential nomination, he'll get it because he waged a gentlemanly and intelligent and reasonable campaign, and if he gets it, America should be proud.
Yep,
From the left, I'm Tom Braden. Good night for Crossfire.
Not only be proud, I'll be terribly happy. From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us next time for another edition of Crossfire.